we're going to see organizations be entirely reshaped as we think about humans and agents working together, augmentation versus replacement, because it won't be a one size fits all in all cases.
So automation used to be about efficiency. Today, AI and automation are reshaping how organizations operate, how employees work, and how companies think about transformation itself. But amid all the conversation about technology, one critical question often gets overlooked. What happens to the human side of the enterprise? Welcome to ctrl+alt+disrupt, the podcast where we explore the ideas, technologies, and the leadership perspectives reshaping the future of business and transformation. I'm your host, Stephanie Rosenfeld, and I'm joined today by Tracy Lipasek, the global head of UST's Intelligent Automation practice. Tracy has spent years helping enterprises navigate automation, digital transformation, and now the rapidly evolving world of AI. But what stood out to me earlier in our conversation was her perspective that successful transformation isn't just about technology. It's about people, process, and culture evolving together. Today, we're talking about why the future of automation may actually be more human than organizations expect. Tracy, thanks for joining us.
Of course, I'm happy to be here.
Okay, so you've seen automation evolve during this last several years a lot. What feels fundamentally different about this moment?
Well, I started working in technology in the late 90s. And even back then, I was doing what would be characterized as automation today. So, very low level automation, of course, things like macros and access databases, and how could you essentially make work more efficient. Fast forward to about 10 to 12 years ago, and RPA became the real big buzzword. And that's actually when I came back into technology. I veered away a little bit and then came back into technology. And so during kind of 2015 ish for until about the early 2020s, RPA was a big focus, and really automation in general. When you talked about it, it really, the lens applied to that was more of an RPA lens. Since that time, now we have the advancements around agentic, we have generative AI, we're talking about large language models, we're talking about small language models, and pretty much every acronym under the sun. And what's different now is it used to be a very discrete application of technology. And now we're seeing much more appetite for how do you think about the work differently? How do you think about the human element, which requires anything automation related to be much more all encompassing. A siloed initiative in one team for one specific set of activities isn't going to deliver the results, quite frankly, that executives and boards are looking for today. So it is different in terms of how you're approaching it, the kind of results that you're expecting, and how you move forward.
That makes a lot of sense. Let's think about the people side, though. You said to me once that organizations often think about the people side last. Where do you think about that? Where do we go from there?
Back when I started, you used to talk about people, process, and technology, and it was about the three-legged stool. And the whole premise behind that, and it's from the 1960s, was that all three had to work in concert together to be able to get what you were looking for from an outcome perspective. So you had to think about the people, the roles, where the work was getting done. You had to think about the process. How was the work supposed to get done? And then, of course, the technology, which was supposed to be an enabler of the process and the people. So now what's happening is this perspective that it's all about the technology. And so it's more of this, well, let's figure out the technology and then we'll sort out the rest later. And so that leads to an unbalanced stool, so to speak. And so that means that you're not getting the outcomes that you're expecting. So that means things like your employee experience is not great because you have workarounds. Maybe it doesn't enable the most efficient process. Maybe it causes other difficulties from a people perspective. And so you have to absolutely think about the people side and the process side and technology all together. But as you mentioned, the people side usually gets left to last. And when you don't think about that, that can generate that unbalanced stool, which means you're not as efficient as you should be or can be when you think about all three of those things together.
Well, and of course, there's the risk that the stool's going to fall over, right?
Yeah.
So,
Yes.
so why do you think it is that companies are still underestimating that people culture part of the three-legged stool?
Well, I think that it gets underestimated a lot for a couple reasons. One is technology is what everybody's talking about. So that is what people want to talk about. So they want to talk about how they have AI pilots going or that they have AI in their call center or their contact center. And that's really where a lot of the value has been placed on talking about the technology. And the people side can be messy in terms of there's so much press around AI taking jobs and how are how is the work that people are doing going to change? And some of those questions don't have firm answers yet. And so it gets a little bit cluttered when you think about how to respond to those types of questions. And so it's just easier not to consider them first because it isn't clear cut. It's not crystal clear for everybody in terms of answering those questions. And when you think about the people side of things, you often need to consider like your organizational change management. So, how are you going to reshape roles and responsibilities? So, maybe the job codes you have now and your career progression and your career architecture needs to change. Maybe the set of responsibilities or the technical aptitude that folks have as part of those individual job codes or titles needs to change. When you're thinking about your communication internally, how are you going to communicate that? How are you going to think about promotion and that progression concept? And how does AI influence those or does it not? And so thinking through all of those components can be really difficult. And so, like most things, you leave the difficult things for the last. And so that's how you end up with a little bit of that unbalanced stool.
Yeah, and when you and I were talking a couple weeks ago, you mentioned a really interesting example, I think from Moderna, where a leadership role combined people and technology responsibilities. Tell me more about what that was and why it stood out.
Yes. So Moderna actually in August of 25 combined Tracy Franklin, who was their chief people officer, and now she's their chief people officer and their chief digital technology officer. So has combined both of those roles together, which I've actually never seen before. And that really stuck out to me because as I just talked about in the last answer, the people part is critical to your success. And so putting those together where it all funnels up to one leader from an accountability perspective and in terms of ownership, it actually makes a lot of sense because then you're considering the employee angle, you're considering the people side to things, all the comments I made about career architecture and how those things may shift or evolve becomes really important because there are workforce implications. And those will evolve over time as well because the technology just continues to change. It becomes more advanced by the day. You can just read anything on the internet in terms of what what new item for today. Today there was a new Claude release. Tomorrow it'll be something else. And so just thinking about the advancement of technology and putting that all under one leader actually makes a lot of sense because it allows all of those components to be harmonized within one single set of accountability.
Yeah, and when you mentioned it to me, I was like I'd never seen or heard anything like this before. Do you think we're going to see more organizations that structure leadership in this way? And if so, what does that say about where we're heading as enterprise transformations occur?
So, like anything, I think we'll see some. I think we'll see some adopt that kind of a structure as we go forward. But I still think there will be a lot of organizations that choose to keep those roles separate. But I think the important part of that is going to be so remember the three legged stool. Think about kind of getting it right as a part of reimagining how the work gets done. So thinking about, okay, I might do it this way today, but how should I be thinking about doing it tomorrow? And when I talk about that, I don't mean just one activity. So, how do I pay this invoice? Or how do I make sure that I'm able to apply cash properly? Think about it holistically end to end. So, where does an order come in all the way through, as an example, delivering and paying for that order? The entire process, not just a chunk of it, but think about the whole thing end to end. Now, you may not be able to tackle all of it at one in one bite, but that's okay. The concept here is, how can you think about it differently? And yes, you might have some quick wins or some low hanging fruit that you want to tackle first, but you've kind of got to keep your North Star as, how do I think about the work differently? How do I have all of the dependencies identified and ensuring that those are in the best shape possible? Things like data. And I know the prior podcast talked a lot about data that was released. So, data quality, accessibility becomes very important. So, there are a lot of elements. And so, just based on that, I could see a situation where the combination of the chief people officer and the chief digital technology officer, CIO type role, doesn't make sense for certain companies, but I think we'll see some adopt for sure.
So, speaking of tomorrow, what do you think about the next few years? In other words, what excites you the most about where AI and automation are heading?
So I was actually talking to my family about this the other day because I feel so lucky. And I feel so lucky because I think anybody who's working in technology at this point, the amount of change that we're going to see over the next couple of years is going to be unbelievable. And I feel lucky because I'm one of those folks who, I am a to the bone change agent. So I am always challenging the status quo. And so I am so excited. I feel so, so lucky in terms of kind of what we see for the next couple of years. And very specifically, it's because we're going to see organizations be entirely reshaped as we think about humans and agents working together, augmentation versus replacement, because it won't be a one size fits all in all cases. Again, you think about the work. What's the best way to get the work done? And some of those answers will be to use an agent. Some of those answers will be to use a human. Some of those answers will be, we're going to use both because we need a human in the loop component. So, really being able to shape that and think about it differently, to me, is so exciting. And I think what goes along with that is empowering employees, really challenging your employees and your organization and your teams to be thinking about the work differently. You might spend a little time up front to try to create an agent or to think about the process differently. But at the end of the day, it is going to make you, and whatever your role is, more efficient. So, really, employee empowerment's important. And the critical part to that is really ensuring your employees know how to leverage the technology they've been provided. So, there's a ton of YouTube videos, press, everything about, using Copilot and how employees can improve their productivity by using agentic AI. Well, that's great, but where's the how part? So, how do you create your own Copilot agent? How do you use any out of the box Copilot agents, as an example? And you could replace Copilot with any technology you want. But essentially, how do you use that, and ensuring that you're empowering your employees, the trial and error process, being very supportive of that and making sure that there's a good place to experiment, because there are risks when you think about using agents in more of a public facing way versus maybe more internal, and what your agents have access to. So there are some considerations there. So, how do you empower your employees? That makes me very excited because I've been able to see so much over the last 30 years. That super exciting to me. And when you think about redesign, coming back to my earlier point related to a lot of companies have this inertia that things are done in a particular way because they've always been done that way. And you're now going to have the fire starter, so to speak, to say, okay, well, now we can finally crack that open and be able to say, how should the work be done? How can we think about the technology enabling the work? What is the right process? Who should execute it? And as a consumer, I'm super excited because I can't wait to see how something like online shopping is going to change over the next 3 to 4 years. Online shopping, as an example, has largely been the same for the last 20 years or so. You go in, you click on something, you add it to your cart. You have to look at pictures yourself. You're trying to figure out, is this something that will work for me? Is it not? I think you're going to see a huge advancement in all of these areas, which is why I'm so excited about the change that we have in front of us.
It's fascinating, and I think we all need to buckle our seatbelts, right?
Yes.
Okay, final question for you. If your listeners today walk away from this conversation with one new perspective on AI and automation, what do you want it to be?
I would like everybody to remember the 1960s three legged stool, and remember that all of the elements are important and that technology is meant to be an enabler. And in this particular case, technology is also going to fill a role potentially when you think about agents. And so making sure that you're thinking about that three legged stool holistically as you're considering how to advance the work that you're doing, how to make it more efficient, how to transform the work. Come back to the 1960s with me and go back to that three-legged stool, because that is so very important to ensuring you achieve the success that you're expecting to achieve.
Yeah, it's the fundamentals. So thank you, Tracy, for this very, very thought provoking conversation. So, technology may be accelerating transformation, but as you reminded us, sustainable change comes down to people, process, and culture working together so our stool does not fall over. So, thank you for joining us on Ctrl+alt+disrupt. Remember to follow us on ust.com and wherever you get your podcasts. Until next time.